There is a photograph taken in Paris in 1838 that is widely celebrated as one of the earliest surviving images of a human being. The photograph is called Boulevard du Temple, and it was made by Louis Daguerre himself, the man whose name would become synonymous with the medium. In it, you can see a broad Parisian boulevard, the rooftops of elegant buildings, the texture of cobblestones, the canopy of trees. It is a remarkable image. Crisp, detailed, eerily still, and it is almost completely empty. The boulevard it depicts was, by every historical account, one of the busiest streets in Paris in 1838. It was lined with theaters, cafes, and shops. It was a place where thousands of people moved through the city each day: vendors, carriages, workers, pedestrians. On the morning Daguerre made this image, in a city of nearly 1 million people, the street should have been alive with motion. Instead, there was almost nothing. A man having his shoes shined, his boot black, kneeling at his feet. Two figures barely visible who remained still long enough to register on the plate. And then, absence. A city, emptied. The explanation offered for this, and for nearly every eerily empty city photograph of the 19th century, is a technical one, and it is not wrong. Early photographic processes, the daguerreotype, the calotype, the wet collodion process, required long exposure times. Depending on the light conditions, the time of day, and the sensitivity of the plate, a single exposure might last anywhere from several seconds to several minutes. Any person or object in motion during that exposure would leave no trace on the image, or at best, a faint, ghostly smear. The image records only what was still. So the crowds were there. They simply moved. They passed through the frame too quickly to leave an impression, and the camera, patient and indifferent, recorded only the world that held still long enough to be seen. This is the standard explanation. It appears in photography textbooks, in museum exhibit notes, in the captions of countless historical image archives. And it is, to be clear, a technically sound explanation. The physics are correct. Long exposures do produce exactly this effect. But if you sit with that explanation for a moment, if you follow it carefully into the historical record, something begins to feel slightly incomplete. Consider what the long exposure explanation actually requires you to accept. For a busy street to appear entirely empty in a photograph, not blurred, not streaked, not populated with ghostly half figures, but genuinely, completely devoid of any human presence, every single person on that street would need to have been moving continuously for the entire duration of the exposure, not pausing, not stopping to speak to a neighbor, or to look in a shop window, or to wait for a carriage to pass, moving constantly, without interruption. There are photographs from this period of New York's Broadway, a street that contemporary accounts describe as so crowded that walking its length at midday was a physical ordeal, a press of bodies and vehicles so dense that carriages could barely pass. And yet, the photographs made on Broadway in the 1850s and 1860s show a street that is, if not entirely empty, populated by only a handful of figures, widely spaced, with no sense whatsoever of the density that the written accounts describe. There are photographs of the great World's Fairs of the mid-19th century, the Crystal Palace exhibition of 1851, the Paris exhibition of 1867, events that drew hundreds of thousands of visitors over their runs, events that were, by contemporary journalistic account, crowded beyond the capacity of the venues to comfortably contain their guests. The photographs made at and around these events, in their exterior shots, in their views of the approaches and the grounds, tend to show a curious sparseness. Figures exist, yes, but rarely in the densities that the written record insists upon. And this is where the explanation begins to develop a small but persistent edge of incompleteness. If the long exposure theory fully explains the emptiness, then we should expect, in many of these images, to find evidence of the people who were moving through the frame, not their clear forms, but their traces, the smears and transparencies and half-resolved shapes that long exposure photography does in fact produce when something moves through a scene. These ghost images exist. They appear in some photographs from the period, in interior shots, in studio settings where the exposure was long and the subject moved slightly, in street scenes where a figure paused briefly then continued on. We know what long exposure motion looks like on a daguerreotype plate. It leaves a mark. But in a significant number of the period's most famous exterior city views, there are no ghost images either. The streets are not blurred, they are not populated with translucent specters of motion, they are simply clean, open, as if the city had been emptied before the photographers set up their equipment and refilled after the lens cap was replaced. In 1853, a photographer named Victor Prévost made a series of calotype images of New York City that are among the most detailed surviving documents of that decade. The images are extraordinary documents. You can read the signage on the storefronts, you can count the bricks in the buildings, and the streets in a city that by 1853 had a population of more than 600,000 people are largely, though not entirely, devoid of human presence. Where people do appear, they are posed, they're still. They appear in several cases to have been deliberately placed.
This brings us to something that photography historians acknowledge openly, though it tends to receive less attention in popular accounts of the medium's history. A very significant proportion of 19th century photographs were staged. This is not controversial. It is a well-documented feature of early photography that photographers frequently arranged their subjects, directed their compositions, and managed the human content of their images with considerable deliberateness. Portrait photography obviously required this. You cannot make a daguerreotype portrait without the subject holding still. But the staging extended well beyond formal portraiture. War photographs, some of the most iconic images of the American Civil War, have been shown to involve repositioned bodies, rearranged props, and carefully chosen angles designed to produce a particular emotional or narrative effect. Photographs of the American West, long treated as straightforward documentary evidence of frontier life, have been re-examined in recent decades and found to involve extensive direction, costuming, and compositional management. The documentary photograph, it turns out, has always been, to some degree, a constructed one. And if exterior city photographs were being made with attention to staging, if photographers were choosing their moments, their angles, their exposures with an eye toward a particular kind of image, then the question of what they were choosing to include and what they were choosing to exclude becomes somewhat more interesting. But why would a photographer in 1855 want an empty street? What purpose would that serve? There is a useful exercise in reading the newspaper accounts and travel writing and civic records of mid-19th century cities alongside the photographic record of those same cities. London in the 1850s, by every written account, was an almost incomprehensible density of human life. The journalist Henry Mayhew, who spent years documenting the street life of the Victorian city, described a metropolis so intensely populated that its poorest districts housed dozens of people to a single room, and its public spaces, its markets, its bridges, its thoroughfares were a constant, surging, unbroken press of human activity. He estimated that tens of thousands of people in London made their living entirely on the streets, moving through the city each day selling, begging, performing, hauling, crying their wares into the general noise. The photographs made in London during this same period do not look like Mayhew's London. They look like a different city, quieter, more orderly, more spacious, populated by isolated figures who stand as if they have been asked to stand there. This discrepancy has a conventional explanation, which is the one we have already discussed, but it also has a dimension that is worth examining a little more carefully. Because what Mayhew was describing, the density, the motion, the continuous human presence, was not simply a feature of certain hours or certain weather. It was the constant baseline condition of city life in that era. There would have been no time of day, no morning light, no favorable angle at which a photographer could have pointed their lens at a major London thoroughfare and found it genuinely, completely empty. And yet the photographs suggest otherwise, repeatedly, consistently, across cities, across decades, across photographers with different equipment, different techniques, different intentions. The anomaly is not confined to cities. Among the earliest extensive photographic surveys of rural America, the work done by itinerant photographers traveling the country in the 1860s and 1870s, the images commissioned by railroad companies and land speculators to document the territories they were developing, there is a recurring visual quality that tends to be described, when it is described at all, as peaceful or serene or evocative of simpler times. What these images tend to show, in town after town across the middle of the country, is a built environment that looks recently constructed and largely unoccupied. Storefronts without customers, streets without traffic, sidewalks without pedestrians. Buildings whose scale and apparent ambition seem slightly mismatched with the apparent absence of the population that would have been needed to justify them. Census records from this period are imperfect. The mechanisms for counting a mobile, dispersed rural population in the mid-19th century were not precise. But the numbers that do exist suggest that many of the towns photographed during this era had populations in the hundreds or low thousands, not large, certainly, but not invisible either. The question of where the people are when you look at these images with any sustained attention does not resolve easily into long exposure times and technical limitation. It begins to feel, gradually, more like a compositional choice, or perhaps more like the absence of something that should have been there but simply wasn't. What keeps this from being purely an American or European curiosity is that the same quality appears in early photography from places that had no shared photographic tradition, no common school of technique, no reason to produce images that looked alike. Early photographs from Meiji-era Japan, made by both Japanese and Western photographers in the 1860s and 1870s, show the streets and markets of Edo, later Tokyo, with the same uncanny sparseness. Japan in the 1860s had a population of approximately 30 million people. The photographs do not look like a country of 30 million people. They look, in many cases, like a country of carefully arranged figures on quiet stages. Early photographs from Cairo, from Bombay, from Shanghai, from the great port cities that were, in the mid-19th century, among the most densely populated places on Earth, all of them carry versions of this same quality. The streets are cleaner than the contemporary written accounts suggest they should be. The populations are thinner. The human density that letters, diaries, and official reports describe is not visible in the lens. And the official explanation, long exposure, motion blur, technical limitation, applies equally to all of them. It does not go away simply because it seems insufficient. But the consistency of the pattern across such wildly different contexts, different cultures, different photographers, different equipment, different intentions, that consistency is at minimum something worth sitting with. There is one more thread that tends to be underweighted in discussions of early photographic history, and it concerns the purpose for which most of these images were made. Photography in the 19th century was not primarily a democratic medium. It was not snapshots and phone cameras and the casual documentation of daily life. It was, for most of its early history, expensive, technically demanding, and deliberately commissioned. Photographs were made for reasons: to document an event, to serve a commercial interest, to create a record for a specific audience with specific expectations about what that record should look like. The images we are discussing, the great city views, the civic surveys, the documentary landscapes, were overwhelmingly made by or for institutions. Governments, railroad companies, land development interests, newspaper and publishing concerns, scientific and engineering organizations. These institutions had interests. They had ideas about what the world they were photographing should look like, and they had, in the photographers they hired, individuals who were skilled not only in chemistry and optics, but in producing images that served the purposes of the people who commissioned them. An image of a new city made for a land development company selling plots to prospective settlers might benefit from suggesting that the city was orderly, spacious, and clean, qualities somewhat at odds with the actual conditions of frontier settlement, but very much aligned with the image a developer would want to project. An image of a newly constructed public building or civic square made for a government eager to demonstrate the modernity and rationality of its institutions might be made at a time or in a way that emphasized the architecture and minimized the chaos of the human activity that normally surrounded it. This is not conspiracy. It is simply the logic of institutional image-making, the same logic that governs how cities present themselves in promotional materials today. But it does mean that the photographic record of the 19th century was curated from its very beginning in ways that shaped what survived, what was published, what was distributed, and what eventually became the visual archive from which we construct our understanding of that era. History is always, to some degree, what was written down, and by extension, what was photographed. The archive is not the past. It is a selection from the past, made by people with intentions and interests and ideas about what mattered and what did not, about what should be seen and what could be allowed to disappear. The 19th century gave us the photograph at the exact moment that the modern world was being built, when cities were expanding at previously unimaginable rates, when populations were shifting and growing and reorganizing in ways that no previous civilization had experienced. And the photographs we have from that era are, almost without exception, strikingly quiet, strikingly still, populated by isolated figures who seem to have been arranged somehow to suggest a world less crowded, less chaotic, less densely human than every other form of evidence insists it actually was. The technical explanation is real. Long exposures erase motion. But the technical explanation is also, in a sense, the most convenient possible explanation, because it makes the question of where the people are into a question about chemistry rather than a question about choices. And chemistry does not explain the photographs that show careful composition. It does not explain the positions of the figures who do appear standing exactly where a director might have placed them. It does not explain the clean streets, the orderly facades, the strange serenity of images made in places that contemporary accounts describe as anything but serene. It does not explain why across a century and across the entire photographed world, the images look so consistently like a version of reality that was, in some quiet and deliberate way, managed. There is a photograph somewhere, in an archive, in a drawer, in a digitized collection that no one has looked at carefully in decades, that shows exactly what a street scene in 1860 actually looked like at midday. The density, the noise, the press of bodies. It may exist. It may simply be waiting for someone to find it. Or it may never have been taken at all. And that, perhaps, is the more interesting possibility, not that the cameras couldn't capture the crowds, but that someone, somewhere, made sure they didn't have to.